Welcome back to the Green Fix. We are so excited to be bringing you the podcast again in 2026. In particular, we are so excited about starting with this interview, which we recorded at the end of last year with the one and only Paul Hawken. It was such an incredible honor and such a great conversation. Probably most of you listening to the podcast would be familiar with Paul's work. He is an author, he is an activist, he's a businessman, and he's someone who has been really walking the talk for more than 60 years. He started his first natural foods company in 1967. He worked with Martin Luther King Jr. during the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965. He was a press coordinator when he was just 19 years old. Incredible human being. Most people would know Paul through his books. He released in 1993 a book called The Ecology of Commerce, which was a book that changed and touched so many people. And in that book, he argued that business was both the primary cause of environmental destruction and the only institution powerful enough to reverse it. And when Ray Anderson, who was the founder of Interface, which is one of the world's largest carpet manufacturers, he read that book and he said it was like a spear to the chest. And it completely transformed how he ran his company, and he turned Interface into the gold standard for corporate sustainability. And that story is captured really beautifully in the documentary Beyond Zero, which we are going to be referencing a few times during the interview. Paul, amongst many other books, went on to write Drawdown, which is a science-based plan for reversing global warming. A follow-up to that was a book called Regeneration. And in this interview, we are going to be talking a lot about his latest book, which is called Carbon, the Book of Life, which we cannot recommend enough. It is such a beautiful book about regaining a sense of awe with the natural world. So we cover a lot of ground on this conversation. We talk about combative language and climate activism. He challenges us on the use of the word sustainability. We talk about what Paul has seen that actually changes the minds of leaders and CEOs. He shares a great story about meeting Walmart's top executives in a closed basement in Arkansas with no food for 5 hours. And how he wrote a speech that transformed one of the world's biggest companies. This was one of those conversations that left us feeling genuinely hopeful and inspired, and we hope it does the same for you. So enjoy the episode. One of our guests, Damon Gamble, was kind enough to introduce us to you, Paul, and suggest live on the podcast that we should interview you. And we're really honored that you have accepted our offer to come on the Green Fix. So big welcome and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad to be platformed by Damon, of course. Anytime. And I guess, Loretta, we met once before, not maybe 9 years ago, here in the audience while I was in Byron Bay.
Yes, and I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to meet you one-on-one this time.
I wish I was there in person, actually. I love Australia. I have 2 children that are Aussies. My first wife was from Adelaide. She's an Adelaide girl.
Well, hopefully we'll see you on this side of the world sometime soon. Paul, I wanted to start today maybe bringing us into a comment that you make around the paradigm shift from fighting carbon to fostering life. Made the shift. At what point did you start thinking that we were using the wrong terminology or focusing on the wrong thing? And tell us a bit more about this concept of regeneration instead.
Well, I never made a switch. I've never made that was from the beginning. And I learned about climate at Stanford Research Institute quite a number of decades ago from really good scientists. And at a time when there was very little public discussion or in the news, just wasn't there at all. But we knew everything then that we need to know now. I mean, there's nothing that is surprises science since that time. But I never use the word fight, combat, tackle. There's one gender really loves those verbs, and guess which one it is. But the reason I don't use them and the reason I suggest not using them is because it's the mindset that caused the problem. And that mindset is you're othering. Okay, you can't fight and tackle and combat something unless it's other and you want to defeat it. It's ridiculous, really, to use that language because basically it is blind to the incredibly inextricable connections and intricate, convoluted ways in which life intertwines with itself, and we are part of that life. And so, as soon as you go to those type of verbs, very male sports, war metaphors, really, then you're way out in left field somewhere, and you're not really part of the conversation at all, in my opinion, because your mind has basically seen the climate as something separate, distant, other than, in fact, you're breathing it right this second and you're exhaling into it. And to every cell in your body is getting by the air, obviously the atmosphere, the oxygen that's in the atmosphere. And the climate is simply how the atmosphere responds to heat and to water, and circulation and wind and ice, so forth, So the climate is this complex relationship, to the earth. And that it's the biosphere, which we're a part of, that creates the climate. It's inseparable. And so when people focus on the climate, you want to say, well, where is the climate? When in fact, every exhalation, every animal, every bird, every insect, every landmass, every ocean, every waterway is adjusting, changing, creating the climate that we so benefit from. So that's why I say, to call it a climate crisis is also the same thing as saying combat and tackle, because climate cannot have a crisis. That's impossible. We are having a crisis for sure. So I'm not denying the reality of a crisis, but it's not a climate crisis. The climate is simply adjusting to what's happening in the biosphere. Yeah.
It's a really profound way of looking at it. I haven't heard anyone describe it like that before. And I think that leads into your usage of regeneration rather than sustainability. And I'd love if you could just unpack that for the listener.
I think it came about when I was, even before Drawdown, right? Blessed Unrest, Ecology of Commerce, and these books came out, and the word was being bandied about sustainability. People asking me about it, And I remember once being in LA, which then was more polluted then than it is today because the clean air stuff and the cars have changed and so forth. So it was just a hot, muggy, smoggy, polluted mess, in my opinion. And I'd say, well, everybody raise your hand. Who wants to stay in LA? Like, no one. Okay. I mean, so to use that term, you sustain what? And then what is that ability? I understand the intention of it. So I praise the intention. I'm not here to criticize any human beings for caring about the earth, but I'm just saying the language. What I'm concerned about is I think the climate movement has failed in producing a narrative that engages people because it uses word net zero. Okay, what's the net? Says who? Zero what? I urge people who think the terminology in the climate movement is to go out and do a man or woman on the street, which I have done, by the way. It's a fake microphone, and say, hi, my name is, that I'm doing interviews with people. Can you tell me what 1.5 C means in the United States? Okay. C, what's C? They'll say, oh, I'll say centigrade or Celsius. I'm going, I have no idea. And why would you ask? How about net zero? Net zero when and what? And net zero carbon emissions? Okay, but who's measuring it? How about decarbonization? There's a good one. I mean, the carbon can't go anywhere. It's here somewhere. It's either up there or it's down here. You can't decarbonize the planet Earth, And carbon neutral. Oh, well, is there the UN going to, I mean, this is there's a neutrality, tipping point, direct air capture, carbon removal. I mean, all these terms which are very useful. I mean, again, I'm not trying to mau people and criticize them. If you're a surgeon, and you two surgeons, and somebody's on there and they're in serious trouble, they're going to go dot, 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 dot in jargon. makes total sense. Jargon's very, very useful. But when you're talking to the other 99+% of the people who do nothing on a day-to-day basis and maybe empathetic or sympathetic or think it's happening, but they don't do anything. Well, why is that after 50 years? Why have we created a greater carbon emissions in 2024 than we ever have since this was first brought up, quite a bit more. And it's because of the way we're talking, the way we're communicating. If you're in business and that's your thing or that's your NGO, you can learn all this language. But to the general populace as a whole, we have to reimagine what our language is and what the story is, what we're saying, what we care for, what we imagine, and why we are leading the lives that we lead.
After the last presidential election, Scott Galloway made a comment that those on the progressive side of the ledger need to realize that they can be right or they can be effective. That's exactly what you're saying. You can feel good being right while you're losing.
Yeah.
But if you genuinely want to make change, you need to be effective.
Yeah, Scott is right on that one. I heard that comment too, and he's really brilliant and pragmatic. The movement to restore life on Earth, both on the biodiversity side or temperature side and the global heating side, needs to be pragmatic. It really does. And I work with two of the biggest corporations in the world on soil, ag, and food, and heat, water, and soil. I mean, that's the triumvirate, and they have such amazing power in the world. They don't think so, by the way, but that's so interesting. But influence, and really to start to look at those dynamics, that have produced a food system that's so toxic, both to people, to animals, to the soil, to water, and to the environment as a whole. The food system we have is just, a big pile of pollution, and because of chemicals, the pesticides, herbicides, the runoff, the 500 dead zones that came from ag, in the oceans today, the nitrous oxide, the CO2, but also the methane. And if you actually do the math and then throw in the nitrous oxide from chemical fertilizers, it's neck and neck as to whether for creating animals the way we create animal food and fossil fuels, as which is the greater contributor to global warming. And the reason you say, well, how could that be? And I don't know about it. Nobody said that. It's because the third group of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they calculate global warming potential, GWP, another bit of jargon, but the GWP over 100 years. In other words, what will this gas do over 100 years? Fair enough. You've got to look ahead, look far ahead. Well, carbon dioxide will stay there past 100 years, no problem. But methane in 10 to 12 years breaks down into CO2 and water. But we count it as if it was going to last 100 years, and you divide it by almost a factor of 10. So you suppress its actual warming. It's not warming potential. It's just plain old warming right now. And so we have a very skewed way of looking at global warming in terms of cause, and the way we raise animals in the world today, whether it's in Australia and America, is very close to being the number one cause of global warming.
I was fortunate to watch the Interface documentary that you were in, probably like end of maybe 2018. It unlocked a piece in my brain of the role that business has to play when it comes to the environment, to nature, but then also the positive influences that transforming a company's operations to a circular economy focused model. And I know that came out of Ray Anderson reading The Ecology of Commerce. You had such a ripple effect from writing that book. I'd love to understand now, writing Carbon, why you felt like it was the right time to write this book.
They sort of recited in that list of jargon. There's this overemphasis on carbon, 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 carbon. And we have 1.2 trillion carbon molecules in every cell of our body. So to talk about it as this thing, we are that thing. And without carbon, there's not a shred of life as we know it, or anybody else or anything else. So just like respect. as I said earlier, I don't blame anybody who's working on this issue. I don't criticize them. I don't go, wow, wow, wow. No, I just think, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless you, or anybody else, the Buddha or anything, whatever you want to be blessed by, I'm offering that blessing to you, whether it's a child or you're 84 years old, doesn't matter. You've woken up to something and you're making an effort to do something that will actually honor. So thank you. Having said that, however, the thing that's blocking much of who we are in terms of being able to partake and engage in activity that is life-changing for our immediate environment, for the future, for our children, for our grandchildren, for ourselves, our friends, is a lack of awe. We don't know where we live. We don't know what's living here. We don't know how it works. And the more you learn about the living world, the more jaw-dropping it becomes. And all of a sudden, this colonial human being looks like an idiot, actually, in the face of what we know scientifically about creatures. And there's 3.4 trillion creatures on Earth, but we know very little about our Earthmates, and they're our Earthmates. They live here too. And what we do know now is that all of them are communicating every single day. There is this amazing amount of communication going on that is now being parsed and broken down and understood by scientists. And it's so fascinating. This assumption that, we're on the top of the food chains, we're the most evolved animal the earth has ever seen. And you have to say, really? Because none of the others destroyed it. Do you call that evolution? So the question is, can we listen to all the voices? And what are they saying? What are they saying to us? And they're talking pretty loudly in terms of the effect we're having, like the effect on them, whether it's the fish or the whales or whether it's the antelope or whether it's the pollinators, you name it. All of life as we know it is being basically murdered and poisoned and killed and pushed off the land, and habitats are being destroyed. And we're all doing that to extract wealth. We're taking. To say we're colonial, we're extractive is true, but I don't think it takes. But awe, wonder, like look at a child. That is there in us still. And that is what changes us. And the reason children are so awestruck by the living world because they don't see it as separate. And then we have to teach them that they're separate. We have to send them to school. And we need to get out of school. And whether it's just by the great books, great podcasts, or whether it's seeing movies by Damon Gameau, or whether it's actually spending a lot of time, in the ocean, in the sea, on the beach, in the forest, in the desert, and if possible with people who know those places, who've been there for hundreds of years, people who co-evolved with those environments, with those landscapes, and with those animals and those things, and have learned so much. I mean, the song lines there are I don't know how many thousands of years. Those song lines were very specific instructions about how to move west to east and back across Australia. So it was a song of the land and this beautiful interaction, how you could be alive and well within that landscape, which is very challenging, as you know. I think we're missing something, which is what a beautiful, extraordinary place we live. Yeah.
That's really beautiful, Paul. That was one of the parts of the book that I enjoyed the most, how much you highlight the wisdom of indigenous cultures, how they understand Earth. And one of the areas that I really loved so much and I haven't stopped thinking about was the chapter called Parlance, which was around language and indigenous language and what a huge loss of knowledge that relates to the world we live in and what we're losing. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I quote at the beginning, Tiokasin goes towards a Lakota man, and he calls them conscious languages, as we say indigenous languages or whatever. And conscious languages do not require a logic of believing, but rather a logic of knowing. And that the earth does not lie ever and only speaks the truth with conscious respect for all beings. That's what we hear. That's what the earth is saying. That's the language of the earth. Nothing in nature lies. It's always telling us the truth. So we can ignore or we can listen. Al-Kamalafi said, do not try to save the earth. No, the earth wants to save you. Imagine that that's who we are relating to. You allow this extraordinary, intelligent planet with its 3.4 trillion creatures evolving over 500 million years in terms of life itself, and it figured a lot of things out. Trial and error, but right now all our errors are on trial because it's actually killing our mother, killing the earth, killing the source of life. So this is a perfect time for awakening, realization. And I think it's not about giving up, but it's about giving in. If we just read the headlines, what's happening, and the rate of species loss, heating, the decline of the earth, really. Who wants to witness such losses? Nobody. But I also think there's a gift in there too. And that gift is what carbon is about. We talked earlier about soil. That guy, Professor Hutton, who years ago decided to find out how many roots there were on a single kernel of rye and planted it and grew it, and using electron microscopes counted 14 million roots on one kernel of rye. Now, each of those roots has a hyphae on it, which is connected to the mycelia. It's connected to fungus. And the thing is that they are communicating. And the plant has got sugar, saying, look, I got some sugar, and communicating to the mycelia, I need nitrogen, I need phosphorus. There's no zinc here. I need zinc, or I need selenium, or, use some odd things, but mostly it's phosphorus and nitrogen. And the mycelia swaps it out. So, okay, here's your phosphorus, thanks for the carbohydrate. And we can see now, Toby Kears, this beautiful, wonderful woman, has learned to light up the mycelia. And so you can see the things moving back and forth, and not just one way. They're moving against each other too. These are like molecules of nourishment. In the Royal Society has basically been doing work on the communication of mycelia, which is that if you actually listen to it, it sounds like a sperm whale, or the San people in Botswana. It's a clicking sound, like Morse code. And that clicking sound repeats itself in packets. So Adam Askey, who is leading the work in the Royal Society, says, oh, those are words. The Morse code is the same, right? A combination of long and short is a word. And then you can put words together, and where you have a sentence, And he says, to much criticism, by the way, saying basically these are sentences. These are complex sentences in the mycelia, and as complex as Indo-European languages. You should decide for yourself. There's the pattern, there's the sound, you decide. So that is just one kernel. And if I look out, I'll tell you what I see outside my window. I see 80 redwood trees. And some of them, I can't put my arms around them. They're so big, right? They've been there for over a century or more. How many roots do they have? And what is going on there in the soil and so forth? So I'm saying that's why we don't know where we live, because we think soil is stuff. It's a medium, throw things in, but in fact, it's an organism. It is exactly like an organism, except it doesn't have a skin. It doesn't stop as an organism, just like mycelia doesn't stop. Really, it can stop, of course, but it doesn't have a boundary. And so that's why we don't know where we live. And I would say that's true about our human body. We have no idea how it works. Again, profound respect to what we do know, but our microbiome is similar to the soil microbiome, which is incredibly complex.
Paul, first of all, I just wanted to thank you because the feeling that you're describing, that awakening in the sense of awe, I felt it when I read your book, and just wanted to congratulate you on this really wonderful publication. One thing that was on my mind as I was reading it is I was just thinking, who did Paul write this for? Who were you thinking about when you were writing this book?
Yeah, my editor asked the same question. They're like, "Who's your audience?" But I didn't want to think about it. I felt there's something I wanted to share, and the next two books are similar. There's a kind of a trilogy, and I had to stop thinking about my market for Drawdown. It's in 18 countries. I mean, all my books all together in 30 languages and over 2 million copies. That's not why I write. It happened. So thank you. But I didn't want to write a book that was positioned into the zeitgeist of right now. I wanted to write a book that touched somebody and touches people, because I feel the angst and these tragedies that everyone feels who is cognizant and aware of what's happening, and a sense of loss. But I didn't feel like my job was to really put that back in people's faces. We're screwing up, and we are, but not not to stay there, and to really go uh, into the complexity and the beauty of where we are. And also, I talk about the misunderstandings and the ignorance that preceded it in many ways. For me, writing is always about curiosity. I never learned to be a writer. I was never trained. I never went to school to be a writer. I never took a class. To me, it's always just about curiosity. I've been curious since I was a lad, and I still am. And I still feel like, gosh, I don't know anything. I don't feel smart at all.
It's the curse of curiosity, right? You always know that there's more to learn. For our listener who is often operating inside organizations driven by metrics, risk mitigation, how have you seen others in your journey communicate this regenerative mindset to stakeholders who prefer to drag their feet when it comes to approaching corporate sustainability or regenerative activities?
It's a really good question. The way I approach it now, first of all, is that regeneration is also like sustainability. It's become a weasel word in the sense that people kind of use it casually, or it can mean this, it can mean that, and but it sounds good. And what I say to them is like, you can just put the word away. I don't care whether you use the word or not. What I do care about is the future, and your company's smack dab in the middle of that future. You're going to be here. So what are you going to do? How are you going to change what you do in order to be around and to actually serve your customer better and well? The fact that I emphasize mostly is the rate of heating, because climate models, we know it broke, and that is that a model that had been developed over 40, 50 years, because they were iteratively changed every year. They put in last year's data, and then the model became more and more accurate. And then the last 18 months, climatologists freely admit they couldn't explain what happened. It didn't comport to a model that had been developed over decades. I don't think it's just an anomaly. Something broke. What broke was our belief and understanding that we had the understanding of how it works. Okay, that's what broke. Climate can't break. Climate's just being good old climate. And if you're not dealing with heat, then you're not serious about sustainability, be able to persevere. And then heating, soil, and water are the triad, though, which people kind of disaggregate in a way. They know that heat has a big effect on, obviously, crops and soil. They know water, the presence or lack thereof. They know that they interact. But really, the only way that you can actually create a sustainable food system that is one that's going to endure is to change the soil, because we're locked into the dynamics of a unpredictable climate, atmospheric activity. Every 1 degree hotter the Earth becomes, there's 7% more water in the atmosphere. So right now, there's 10% more water in the atmosphere than there was, in 1950. And it's going up every single year. And what happens in that water, it tends to concentrate, and not surprisingly. And then you get these flash floods and tremendous amount of rain coming down in areas where it has done that occasionally, but now in a much more forceful way. And then in between those concentrations of water, you get drought. So you're getting whiplash of effects and impacts. And the way a company that is in food can deal with that is to really educate and work with their farmers, their growers, to grow in such a way that the soil holds and absorbs more water. That water up there should be down here. But the way commercial agriculture is doing the opposite, it's like bare soil, and the increasing heat is actually causing evapotranspiration, causing more water to go up there. So, it's a fool's errand. What I point out is that this way leads to savings. You save money. This way leads to more expenses. So I'm always emphasizing cost. Like, you got the most costly way to do it right now. And I'm not here to make a believer out of you. I'm here to help you be pragmatic, because that's your job. You're the CEO. Your job is pragmatism. It is not pragmatic to pretend that it's not going to get hotter and hotter and hotter, and the impacts are not going to devolve upon you, your company, your farms, your food system. It's not a come to Jesus and it says, do you believe? Like, no, it's like, do you see? It's pattern recognition. Try to wean off the jargon, all the weasel words, and wean them away and stick to practice and get better at it.
I love that, because I think the word pragmatism is often used as a weasel word for traditional business executives as well. Like, oh, we can't do that. We need to be pragmatic. Well, if you're being paid to be pragmatic, let's be pragmatic.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we'd really like to talk about your thoughts around the importance of decentralized and community-driven actions. In the Australian context, there's often a focus on big picture national policy and large-scale projects as being the solution to get us out of whatever current problem that we're in. But how do you believe companies need to be supporting localized initiatives instead of this large multi-stakeholder undertakings?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, nature is not top down. So you're fighting it if you think you have a top down way or solution to it, because it won't work. I mean, nature is entirely composed from your cell in your body to everything, of communities. It's all community. So what you want to do is to really recognize that and what strengthens community. And because community is about connection by definition. And so what are you doing possibly that is messing up community, breaking it up and disaggregating it? And what can you do to do the opposite, to bring people together? And it doesn't mean writing big checks. That's very good and very important, but it's actually about the company showing up. People see that you're a part of a healthy community. Your business wants to be a healthy community, and people who work in a business can tell you right away whether it is or isn't. And so if it's not a healthy community, well, what would it mean to be a healthy community, And that involves listening, respect, communication, understanding. Understanding includes education and, awareness. And if that's not there or failing or been put in secondary, that company is not going to do very well.
Absolutely. We really want to talk to the future and your advice. You have this incredible business background, and decades later, we're still having this issue of bringing capital to the right places that are actually going to allow us to live in a more regenerative way. Is there anything else you would add to that?
I'd still take away the adjective regenerative. Regeneration means to create more life. That's it, because that's what life does. That's the default mode of life, period. End of subject. It is binary in a sense. Whatever your company is, your position in the company, you can just ask yourself, are we creating life or destroying life? And be honest, be real, do your homework, don't bullshit. But I'll tell you an interface story once where they had in one of the manufacturing places, they brought in executives from different companies to teach them the interface way. And sometimes people would be sent there and they really didn't want to be there. And there was a vice president, I'll tell it was Sarah Lee, big baking product food company. Anyway, she wasn't really having it. She was asking very sort of provocative but sort of pointed questions. Anyway, and finally she said, by the way, where's the loo? And they said, oh, well, just follow the blue path. It was in a warehouse. It's an active warehouse of manufacturing and storage, forklifts and things. And so they said, oh, just follow the blue path and that'll take you to the loo. And so she did. And then she stopped because there was a forklift that was coming the other way. It had a big, big, big roll of carpet. And she said, tell me, what do you do here? He said, ma'am, I save the earth. What do you do?
Wow.
She was like, this is a guy in the warehouse. And they talked some more, and then she went to the came back, and she was shaken up. But that happened because Ray spent time and money in sharing and informing and educating every single person in that company what the mission was. And they had a mission. But sustainability, with all due respect, is not a mission. Regenerative, fill in the noun, is not a mission. That's an act. It's nice. It's good. Better than nothing. That's not a mission. So the company needs a mission that brings people together, that they understand, that makes sense. Bring in missionaries too. You can bring them in from the outside, who maybe know more than you do. Who knows? But end of the day, it has to be nested in that place, and be part of the culture. And that culture can really do amazing things. That's community. Culture and community are the same thing. It was actually in Australia when I was giving a talk, and somebody asked me about Ray Anderson's, what makes a difference? What makes the biggest difference for a CEO that you've seen historically? I said, oh, that's an easy question. And they said, really? Easy? Yeah. It's pretty much all the same thing. And what? It said it was their daughter coming back from college or school saying, Dad, what are you doing? I saw it again and again. Not their son, because they'll get defensive to their son, not to their daughters. And it's a genuine question from the daughter that the father loved, and she loved her father. But on that, she wanted to know what he was doing, what he was thinking. It's fascinating when you think about it, because it's those really intimate moments, those things of vulnerability and trust that actually are the pivot point.
It's really beautiful. And it's also empowering. Just reminds us that it could just be a personal connection that you have with someone in an instant that actually makes a difference to the other person. And it's quite empowering because we often feel like there's nothing big enough that you can do. So beautiful. So thank you, Paul.
If we had more time, I would tell you the Walmart story, because it's such a fascinating story.
I mean, we've got the time, Paul.
Yeah. Okay. So 20 years ago, a friend of mine, Jim Ellison, a river rafter, had been working with Walmart for 2 years, taking executives to You Are What You Eat trips to bus stations on Mount Washington and into virgin forest. They couldn't take their phones or anything. They had to just be there, sit by a fire, talk. For 2-3 days, go back to being CEO of Walmart, CEO of Sam's Club, which, anyway, he did it for 2 years. And he called me, and he's a friend, known him a long time. And he said, would you consult with Walmart? And I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, because they have a terrible reputation, and I'm not interested in doing anything for their reputation. That's their problem. And then he said, okay. Right. Then he called me back and he said, well, what are you interested in? I said, systems. I love systems. I'm fascinated. They have the biggest commercial system in the world. I said, if the whole system is not up for discussion, I'm not interested. And so he called me back again. He said, they want to take one thing off the table from the system. I said, what's that? He said, growth. I said, okay. You can take that off the table. They got back to me. He said, okay, they want to fly up from Arkansas and kick the tires. And I remember standing outside, I was looking down at my feet and going, there's no tires there. And the answer is absolutely not. And then they called back and said, okay, you can come here. What do you want? And I said, I want $20,000 a month for 12 months guaranteed. And he inhaled. He said, oh, well, I'll go back to you. And he got back to me and said, they don't do that. I said, fine, I'm cool. I'm happy. He called me back. He said, okay, they've accepted it. And so I flew down to Bentonville to meet with the CEO, the incoming CEO after that, Mike Duke, and then Doug McMillan, who is now the CEO, and Eduardo Castro's head of Walmart Americas, head of legal, and I forget, Jib was there. There was one other person anyway. Flew down there, and we were meeting in the closed basement of a restaurant. There was no food. I don't think there was even tea. There was water, but we met for 5 hours. And the first thing I said, because I sat next to Lee, I said, Lee, I'm not taking any of your money. He said, our money is not good enough for you. You're too good for us. And I said, no, I have 3 kids in Ivy League schools. I desperately need the money. And he said, well, why aren't you taking it? I said, because I want you to believe everything I'm going to tell you. I got nothing on it. And that was 5 hours. And I said, basically, in many ways, but I said, here's the environment, here's social justice. It's like one thing, because they had really disaggregated it entirely. So at the end of the thing, they talked about what they've done, what they know, and how difficult it is. And I said, well, you should go give a speech. You should come out. You should come out. You're coming out to me. You're coming out. You want to do something about the environment. Come out. And he said, well, we haven't done anything. I said, well, that's the first thing you said. We've studied this for 2 years. We haven't done a thing. And then I said, the second thing you tell them is you think you know what true north is. You may not, but you think you do. That's jib, and that's the 2 years of you are what you eat. And the third thing, just say, give us help, watch us, give us feedback. We're learning. That's all you have to say. Just be honest. No claims. And anyway, and then after, when I got, I paid my way home, and then I wrote him a 3-page letter. And then Jim said he carried around, he would do the New York Times crosswords, where he was in the private going around to all the different Walmarts. And then he pulled the letter out. He kept the letter for quite a while. I said, is Hawken serious about this? And he said, oh yeah, Hawken's serious. And she said, no, I thought so. He put it back in his pocket. And then in October of that year, Ruben, who worked there, a really nice guy, a friend, said, would you write Lee Scott's speech? And I said, why me? I mean, I wasn't being paid, it wasn't like I'm a speechwriter. And he said, well, they've gone through 30 versions of the speech. It's getting worse and worse every time. And I said, well, send me the content and I'll get back to you. So he did. And 20 minutes later, after I read it, I wrote back. I said, nobody could write a speech. There's no content. I said, no wonder you haven't got one. And then Lee was copied or BC'd or CC'd. I don't know. I didn't notice it. Lee Scott. And he called me up in his inimitable Arkansas accent, sounded like Bill Clinton, Paul, this is Lee. I thought about it. I want you to write this speech. I said, you're not saying anything. And he said, I want you to write the speech I should give. Can I read that back to you? Should. I said, okay, if you want, I will. So I sat down and write it. And I called for 100% renewable energy, zero waste, a rise in the minimum wage for the whole country, not just Walmart. And I compared Walmart to the US government because we had Katrina, which is a horrible hurricane and just devastation. There was whole Walmart stores that just were blown away by wind and flooding. But Walmart, there's this woman, Jessie, she was the assistant manager of a store in Waveland, Mississippi, and it was all flooded. The store was flooded. The whole town was flooded. There was no electricity. And she got a front loader and she went into the store and she just made an aisle down the store and told people in town, anything that's dry, you can take it if you need it. Help yourself. And I told that story in the speech and I said, this is who you are. This is you. This is who Walmart is. And he gave the speech. But before he gave the speech, he sends the 700 people in the company, and every person except one said, do not give this speech. Do not give this speech. And then the chairman of the board, Rob Walton, said, don't give this speech either. So Lee then sent it back to everybody and said, I want you to read this speech again because I am going to give the speech. The only person who said to give the speech was Doug McMillon, the CEO today, the head of Sam's Club. He said it. And then Rob Walton, who's the chair and, worth what, $20-30 billion or whatever. So he said, would you talk to Rob about this minimum wage thing? He said, he doesn't, that's the thing he's uncomfortable with because it's a government thing. We don't interfere with the government. Right. And so Rob finally called me and he just got off his roof in Arizona. He was fixing the slate tiles and, and talking like he had all the time in the world. Really polite. That's Southern quality of really being super polite and friendly. And finally, he brought up the minimum wage thing. And he said, I just don't feel comfortable about that. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, because 95% of Americans want the rise of the minimum wage. And there's silence. He said, they do? I said, uh-huh. I said, they got to be your customers, man. Actually, if anybody would benefit the most from this, it's you. But that's not why to do it. I said, every minimum wage earner in the country shops at Walmart. And so he approved it. Anyway, so Lee did give the speech. They did water it down in the wording. I have both speeches. I can see what they watered down and what was my original speech. But he did all the same thing: renewable energy, rise in minimum wage, zero waste. I mean, triple truck mileage, the whole thing. It's all there. And so this is the 20th anniversary this month, and it's called The Speech now. And so I get to go on stage with Doug and Lee and Jib, and we're going to talk about it and just joke about it, really, because there was so many funny things that happened. But the whole company changed from that point on in terms of sustainability. Absolutely changed.
What's fascinating about that is that just like Ray Anderson, Lee was the one who was taking significant political flack and using a lot of their political capital because they could see the direction that the company had to go in before the majority of people could see it, because they didn't even comprehend that the business could survive and do this at the same time. And so we love our listeners sharing this podcast with their executive team, because we're constantly talking about as you said, the pragmatism about making business decisions that are in the best interests of the company long term. And that involves taking political risks, knowing that you are coming from the right place and heading in the right direction to be that steward of your company as a leader. That's an amazing example.
Fascinating about it, because they did do, not finished complete, but on renewable energy. And they are solarized to the max, on the storage distribution centers. And right now in the United States, because of AI and the threat of AI, data centers, electricity prices are just skyrocketing where they are. And they're making money. They're cashing in that sense. If you compare, if we buy it on the open market, they're making money because they're selling it on the open market. In other words, not only are they not paying, but actually they can sell it.
Yeah, it's a revenue stream.
Yeah, it's a revenue stream. If you're just looking by quarter, 90 days, you got to report out, okay? But if you step back and say, well, what can we do that's actually going to benefit this company in the long term? Because don't we all want to be here for the long term? And so what makes sense? Yeah, they're very, very, very careful about how they spend their money. They don't have extra money lying around. And they executed really, really well on all those things. Yeah.
One of the things is, as I was listening to you share that story with us, you're such an amazing systems thinker. When did you first realize that you were a systems thinker and that the way that your brain works is not necessarily how the majority of brains work?
Well, that's an interesting question. It comes so naturally. I think it was, Dana Meadows. I think it was just what I was reading, the books I was reading. I was so influenced by people, and they're quoted a lot in the Ecology of Commerce. You'll see the influences, that really helped create that book. But also I just feel like, and we can see it to this day, all of us, just how the harm and self-harm and other harm that comes to the world when you don't think that way. When there's so much suffering. Look at Netanyahu and Gaza. I mean, the penultimate othering of the world, right now. But it's also in Syria and Sudan. But you see it with businesses too, because of greed and people going for the short term, going for the big payout, big this and that. And then you see it, Meta. I mean, what they've done, Buddhists slaughtering Muslims because of what they heard on Meta. And this is in Myanmar, which is a very ancient Buddhist country, because they were believing what they were reading on social media. So we're in a very strange time. And I think a company itself with leadership has the ability and the potential to bring people together in a way that they want to be brought together. Not like, okay, well, he's talking or she's talking and we better listen, and she has a plan or he has a plan. No, because it really depends upon also listening and engaging, not just pronouncing, not just knowing, but not knowing. After Ray Anderson read my book, interesting to listen and read his first speech to his staff, to his whole company. That speech is very, very beautiful, and it's humble and it's strong, both. But he's a rare guy. So, but I can't think of a better country in some ways than Australia for you guys to make that kind of difference. I really do. I spent a lot of time there, and I have family there in Adelaide. You might not use this word, but there's an intimacy. There is a quality that Australians have that you cannot see yourself. That is very beautiful and visible. There's something in Australia, something in the water. I don't know, but that I think would be a natural progenitor of the qualities and directions that, the Green Fix is talking about.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us of that. I think we naturally feel it, but we sometimes forget it because we feel so far away and so small in comparison to the rest of the world. So thank you for reminding us.
Wow. Yeah, small but important. Really, really important.
Paul, one last question. You've written Drawdown, then Regeneration, now Carbon. What is the next frontier for you in your thinking? What can we expect to see from you in the next couple of years?
Well, at least one more book. Takes a couple years to write a book. And I've never said anybody outside to you. See, this is the first time you'll hear about it. The name keeps changing, but right now it's called the Alliance for the Earth. And it is a NGO, but that's not the point. It gathers the nonprofits of the world who are working on restoring life on Earth and the children and the schools and the farmland and the rivers and, all the different manifestations of humanity that was in Blessed Unrest. I don't know if you read Blessed Unrest, but that's an important book to read right now. And there's a typology. The addendum has this typology of all the different types of nonprofits in the world, and there's over 300. And who knew? Somebody supported us to spend a year trying to figure that one out. And but it's gathering just the URL, the people, focus, obviously, location, very simple sort of information, and then you can click on it and go to the website and get more information. Okay. But what it's going to do is several things. One is we got about 15,000 organizations in it so far, which we, placed in ourselves, and it's going to have a AI function internally, not externally. And Damon might be using this too, so maybe it'll change the name. It's called the Earth Oracle. So you can type in and say, who's doing deforestation, working on deforestation in Botswana? The Oracle scrapes the websites, and then it gives you the information. And the idea is that that there is this extraordinary capacity of human beings to renew, to restore, to revitalize, to regenerate, to rebuild, to connect, to remember. And we don't really see it. We don't know it. We know it from our friends, from the people we are in touch with for sure, but you never read about it, in the Herald. You don't read about it in the New York Times. You don't read about it in Financial Times. The Guardian doesn't report, except if something does something unusual, if somebody gets killed, like in Brazil and Amazon, you'll read about it, right? But otherwise, how do you know it's there? No one knows, and no one talks about it. So that's why we're bringing it together, so that you can start to see, well, this is humanity. This is what we are doing and what we care about, and so it has a lot of other little facets to it too, but it's not a top-down organization, it's got an ED, it's got staff, it's got a director. No, I mean, it's got people in the background. We're going to have a council, and a council just means that if there's any questions, then that need to be answered, or, it's a very deliberative, wise council of men and women from all around the world in different cultures, maybe 12 people, and everybody else is just a worker bee trying to make the thing work and run, but it has a language translator. So now you're from Botswana and you're going to say, Australia, and then you've asked a question and up comes Damon, maybe, from the Regenerators, right? Okay. It is 105 languages. You can translate it like that. So now you can start to read and communicate with each other in a way that eliminates that barrier, which then will increase people's sense, I think, of connectedness. And so that's what AI is used for. But like I say, it's not AI to solve things that are outside of the circle. It's going to stay in the circle. There's just a slogan. The way you heal a system is to connect more of it to itself.
Wow.
Simple.
That's so profound. And particularly because the sense of dislocation that people have often leads to crumbling systems.
Yeah. I mean, your brothers and sisters are out there and they're beautiful. I would probably end with a few sort of koans here. But the thing is, net zero is impossible. Abundance is possible. Seek cause before cure. The natural world cares about us, not you. Climate is a teacher, a guide, not a crisis. Increased productivity, and this relates to business, increased productivity is a durable will. It is the Jevons paradox of human endeavor. True breakthroughs break nothing. Create products that die peacefully, and then don't save the earth, it wants to save you.
I love that. That is amazing. Thanks, Paul.
You're so welcome. Thank you both.
This has just been, absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. When the next book comes out, it's called Upstream, by the way. That's like seek cause before cure. It's that whole Bishop Desmond Tutu thing you've heard many times about pulling people out of the river. And then finally somebody says, go upstream and figure out who's throwing them in the river. And so, yeah, let's figure out the cause and stop trying to fix it downstream, which is what we're doing.